Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time.
So we can talk about episode 2, but I definitely want to talk about episode 3 that just aired 2 nights ago as we record this. Episode 2 mostly focused on Goldberg, the end of the streak, and Bret Hart and Bill Goldberg. And I have some thoughts, as you probably would guess. I thought, like, again, we talked about the first episode of Who Killed WCW. It's like we've heard a lot of this before. You know, we're not new to the story. There's been very good books written on this. It's moderately amusing to get, like commentary from today from some of these guys. And to see some of the backstage footage here and there. And Bret Hart is phenomenal on here. I mean, he's just telling it like it is. And let's start with Nash and Goldberg, because everybody has panned Nash ending the streak ever since it happened. And Nash, I mean, he still stands by the decision. Like, they go into why Nash was booking, and all of that, and him becoming a booker. But I mean, he made the statement that Jesse said earlier on the show, that for a babyface, the money is in the chase. And he thought that Goldberg losing to him and then chasing him for the belt, or chasing somebody for the belt, as it would turn out. He said, I don't get why, he didn't really understand why anyone has a problem with that. Justin, what do you think about Kevin Nash's comments?
I mean, so many of these guys are so far up their own ass. It's impossible to take them seriously. And it's weird because, like, some of the stuff Kevin Nash says, I do agree with. Like,
Yeah.
I think for the most part, yeah, the money is in the chase.
Well, except when Hogan had the title for like 4 years in the 80s.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. But, like, and he mentioned, like, look at the crowd when he won the title, they went nuts. And that's true. If you look at the crowd, they're going pretty crazy. But I think a big part of that is just because the crowd was excited to be there to see the streak end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously we know what happens. The finger poke of doom, and it just the chase is just null and void at that point. So
yeah. I mean,
Go
look,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I was a 15-year-old, almost 15 at the time, and I made no bones about it. I don't like Goldberg now. I didn't like him then. I didn't get the appeal at all. Always thought he stunk in the ring. I thought he was a cheap Steve Austin, personally, at the time. And I'm not going to lie, I would have been cheering if I was there that night too, because I didn't like Goldberg. But I would also acknowledge I would have been the vast minority of the audience at the time, and that Goldberg was massively over and was one of the few bright spots that they had as far as like newer guys coming along. So, I mean, it just kind of came off like Nash really hasn't learned anything since then, that was probably not. And then he defended the finger poke of doom too. Oh my gosh. Which, like, I mean, they brought it back. I'm going to go a little bit into episode 3, because in episode 3, he brought it up again. And he was talking about like all the terrible shit they did at the end when Russo was there. And yes, it was terrible. And he calls back to that. And he says, look at when they tried to dump the blood on me in the ring, the new blood stuff. And he's like, look at me there. And then contrast that with, the finger poke of doom. And Nash says, which was more detrimental to this company? And it's like, dude, the finger poke of doom happened at the Georgia Dome when the company was on fire, and the stupid bloodbath shit happened when the company was dying. There's no comparison. Like, the bloodbath thing didn't matter to the trajectory of the company. It just didn't. The finger poke did, because you had just beat Goldberg and then you turned around and did that. That's why it was such a problem, I think. I'll let you jump in, Jesse.
Butts in seats, Tony Schiavone declaring McFoley was winning the title. Yes, so by far the finger poke of doom is the more hideous. Actually, it's just the more universally watched moment, and it's way more hideous because, again, how many people were watching it, which is to one of my biggest points. I'm going to fast forward a little to episode 3. For all those fans who are 21 and younger, if you are just making these bizarre claims about how horrible certain things are on television these days. Go watch episode 3 of Who Killed WCW and see some of the segments that rolled through. But 30, that's 25 to 30 minutes of it. You got 9 months of that style of programming, and just think about how GD awful that stuff was. And you're telling me that anything today is even as deplorable as that. I think the only thing we can say about AEW is maybe, like, in terms of negativity, maybe 10 to 15 minute matches, like matches that overstay their welcome, are what we find to be slightly negative. And it's like, maybe the match should have ended earlier. We talked about this last week. Maybe there should be more 6-minute matches on TV. We talked about on classics.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's one of my biggest takeaways. But in terms of Kevin Nash, the politician, no, it's such a bad look. Everybody's just trying to point fingers at the other person, when in reality they all had their hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. Is not one person killed this promotion. It was a lot of people. It was Hogan. It was Bischoff. It was Russo at the end. It was the business side that never liked WCW. Like, there's a lot of blame. You could blame some people more than others, certainly, but there is not a singular answer. Justin, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. So I had been thinking before I watched episode 3, we'd just covered Spring Stampede. What was that? 99.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody become a Patreon. Go listen to that episode. It's awesome. And where we talked about, this time frame with the finger poke of doom. And it just had me thinking about, like, how I was with as a fan there, and how I felt about WCW, and how much of that is tied to how seriously I take the world championship, because that is such a big part of a wrestling promotion, is how do we feel about the championship? Because if we don't give a shit about the champion, why do we care about the promotion? And while I agree with, a lot of the things you guys are saying, the one thing I will say about the finger poke of doom is that I don't think it was an unsalvageable misstep on their part. Like, the company was not doomed at that point. I don't think I gave up on them at that point. And so I was looking at the lineage of the world title, and I realized when I gave up on it, when I was just like, this company fucking stinks and I don't care who their champion is anymore. And it started in October of 99, where we had 5 straight world champions who vacated the world title. And that's 5. There after the 5th, there was a 6th champion, and then he vacated it. And it just made me not care about the world championship anymore. And watching episode 3, well, who came into WCW in October of 99? Vince Russo.
Oh, yes.
And just watching that entire episode, it was like, oh yeah, I fucking hated that entire era of WCW. And at least when you talk about Eric Bischoff, he brought some things to the table. He brought in Hogan and Savage, and was so important, bringing in all the luchadors and starting the NWO. And he definitely is a player when you talk about the demise of WCW. And Ryan, I think you summed it up fantastically, saying, like, you have to put some of it on Bischoff. You have to put some of it on Hogan. You have to put some of it on the TV executives who wanted the company gone. And you got to put some on Russo. And to me, the biggest chunk of guilt goes to Russo and Hogan, because when things were still salvageable, Hogan would not do the right thing. And then an unleashed Russo, who did not have the handcuffs or the filter of a Vince McMahon, destroyed the company to me. Like, he made it completely unwatchable.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my big takeaway, is not only watching episode 3, it's like, oh, I hated this. I also thought he came off as utterly unlikable in that show. talking about, I'm making a TV show, bro. Dude, yeah, you're making a wrestling TV show. Imagine if some, 30-minute sitcom comedy director was, I'm just making TV. No, you have a very specific kind of television show that you need to put out in front of your fans. And you failed spectacularly at it, Vince.
He has learned nothing at all. It was mind-boggling watching him defend all of this shit, which clearly was bad.
Yep.
And he did you that part where he talked about putting the title on David Arquette? This is in episode 3. And then he's like, bro, everybody in that room supported it. And then they go to everyone else and they're like, we thought that was a dumb idea. Now, Tony Schiavone did come up with the idea, and that is true. Tony has talked about it on his podcast. It is true that Tony Schiavone pitched that. They should have said no.
Yep.
And he tries to defend it. And he's like, look, we were in USA Today after this happened because this actor had our world title. But he doesn't understand that there's a difference between good press and bad press. And that's bad press because anyone reading that is not going to think, oh, I got to watch this. They're going to think that company is a joke. The other company, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock. I've heard about what they're doing. David Arquette, that scrawny little guy. And this is not on David Arquette because he didn't want to win the world title. He's their world like what a joke of a wrestling company. And I went back and I looked at the ratings, and so that happened on a Thunder where he won the world title. The following Monday, that episode of Monday Nitro was the second biggest proportional gap in the history of the Monday Night Wars. So Monday Night Raw pretty much tripled the rating of Nitro the next Monday. And the only time there was a bigger spread was a few weeks before that, the night after WrestleMania 2000, for the night after Mania. Other than that, the Nitro after Thunder had the biggest spread proportionally of the entire Monday Night War ratings feud. And this guy still thinks it was a good idea. He has learned nothing. That is indefensible. And for him to say, oh yeah, man, we got all this attention. Dude, no, you didn't. Like, your ratings tanked. The company was going nowhere. That is not the kind of, not the kind of attention. That's not causing anyone to buy tickets. And that's what this business is about. And it's just kind of mind-boggling to me that, I mean, he has a big audience still. This guy does a podcast and lots of people watch it. They must find him engaging as a personality because as far as knowing wrestling goes, that tells you all you need to know. He still thinks that was a good idea. This is a guy who came into WCW and made himself the focal point of the shows. He put the title on himself. He had himself in the ring giving promos and wrestling. Dude, you were hired to be a writer. I remember when he got hired, and I knew his name from writing for the magazine, like when wasn't he Vic Venom first or something like that? And then he was Vince Russo, and then he was on Livewire. Like, I knew who he was. But like, during the height of the Attitude Era, when he was there, he was not a character. He was behind the scenes for the most part. So like, he didn't come over where people like, oh, I want to see Vince Russo on TV. Yeah, people were excited when he got hired because we didn't know what was going to happen. And we knew he was one of the writers for the company that was way freaking better at that moment in time. But what Justin said is right. Vince McMahon, detestable human being, but Vince McMahon harnessed the guy, and he took some of his ideas and some of the other ideas he didn't. But one of the fundamental differences between him writing WWF and him writing WCW is that when he got to WCW, they had already buried Goldberg. They had already crushed any momentum they had of people moving up the card. When he was with the WWF, they had these ascendant generational stars that he did not make. Like, he was there. He didn't write the Austin 316 promo. You know, Rock people had more creative freedom over their promos back then. Rock was making himself what he became. like, yeah, he had some of this car crash TV stuff going on, and people all know about it from the Attitude Era, but we've talked about it on the show. None of that shit ages well. It's terrible television. Like, even some of the best Raw's Wars from the Attitude Era, I'd rather watch Dynamite, to be honest with you, than any of those. Even though the company was like on fire, I'd rather watch a 2024 Dynamite than most Raws from 98 or 99, frankly, because it hasn't aged well because it just wasn't good TV. It was crash TV while they had massive stars. And the people were tuning in because of the massive stars, not because of the crash TV and Mae Young and all that. I don't even remember if that was when Russo was there. Whatever. Like the crazy shit that was happening on TV. That's not really why people were tuning in. They were tuning in because of Steve Austin and The Rock and The Undertaker, and like Hunter was on the rise, like that stuff. That's why they were tuning in. And I'll give them like a little credit for scripting some of their stuff, but they become those same guys without Vince Russo. So he goes to WCW, and his job was to make the show more watchable and to create stars like that. And he did not know how to create stars like that. All he knew how to do was car crash TV, and it didn't work. And it was low rent and nothing made sense. And then he made himself the focal point of TV, and he went out there and he aired his grievances, him and Ed Ferrara, making fun of Jim Ross, making fun of people that he didn't like from the WWF. And you can totally understand why some of these guys, even today, are like, geez, we wondered if he was there to sabotage WCW because it was so freaking bad, dude. What are you? And he's still defending it to this day. Mind blowing. Just mind blowing. Jesse.
Two things on that with Russo. It makes you wonder if he was behind the Huckster Nacho Man stuff from 96, early 97. That's number one. And then to piggyback off what you just been talking about, making himself an honor talent world champion. The most hideous comment last night on that show was he said that he was 80% more, or 80% of the roster he was more over than. The
he says a better worker or something like that. Like
something along those lines.
Better worker than 80% of the locker room. This guy who had never been a television character before. That tells you all you need to know about the ego of this guy. And that's why he drove the company into the ground. Lots of people, had started to put that coffin underground. But I mean, this guy drove in the final nails. He really did. And I agree with Justin. I tuned in when they brought him in. I remember watching that with some excitement, thinking maybe they could turn it around. And then even when Bischoff came back, but like within a couple weeks, I was tuned out. This is terrible. Some of the worst wrestling to ever air on TV ever in a year. Horrid. Absolutely horrid. And okay. This Bill Goldberg. We got to get to this. This Bill Goldberg came off as one of the most unlikable people I have ever seen. And we know this guy said some problematic things in recent months, which has made me feel justified in never liking the guy ever. I'll say it again. I never found him captivating. I see why some people did. I didn't. The stuff with Bret and the injury, he does not get it. And I know people think Bret whines about this. He's talking about it because he's asked about it. This is not a guy who just goes around talking about this kind of stuff. I've said this on the show. I've had conversations with Bret Hart. He doesn't bring up Montreal out of nowhere. He doesn't bring up Goldberg out of nowhere. He's talking about it because he asked about it for an interview. And for Bill Goldberg to sit there and shrug his shoulders and say, well, you knew the kick was coming on the career-ending injury he gave Bret Hart, this mule kick, we didn't even look at the guy as he's coming off the ropes, this back kick at Starrcade 99 is unfathomable to me. Let me ask you guys a question. So you pull up to an intersection, a lighted intersection, right? And you get the green light. And so you're going, and a car comes and T-bones you. And if that guy gets out of the car and he says, well, you knew I could run the red light. Whose fault is it? I mean, you knew the kick was coming. Yeah, but your job is to pull the kick and not kick the guy's effing head off, dude. You knew the kick was coming? That's your defense? It's like, no, your job in that other scenario is you have to stop at the red light. And in Goldberg's case, you need to not connect with the kick. And you don't kick full blast without even looking at the guy. Just Reprehensible.
Well, and not to slow your momentum here, Ryan, because you're on a hell of a roll here. It wasn't just the kick. He dropped Bret on his head
yes.
on the ring at the ring post when Bret was doing the figure four. You know,
Yeah.
it was like, I think it was that, the kick, and one other thing. It was just this cascade of errors from Goldberg that basically ended Bret's career. Not basically, ended Bret's career.
I got one other thing I got to say on this. It just popped into my mind. I'm going to keep going here. I saw some people on social media defending Goldberg. And like, come on, Bret, you went on to work a hardcore match with Terry Funk after this happened, and you're blaming Goldberg? He had a freaking head injury. Read his book. He couldn't even remember what was happening, like what he did the day before, or where he was, because he had a series of concussions. It started there, and then WCW's medical staff they kept pushing him out there to work. They didn't realize what was happening. To say that, oh, but Bret, you continued to work because he had a head injury. He didn't know what he was doing until finally the constant headaches and flashes that he was having, they finally realized what was going on. And they said, you have suffered a series of concussions in just a couple of weeks. Jesus, man. I don't know, man. All right. Somebody else.
Yeah, when he had his match with Scott Hall before the Hogan, or it was same card, Georgia Dome, and they pointed out those handful of things that went wrong, and Goldberg's like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. He admitted it to Scott Hall.
Yes. Yeah.
There you go. Right there. Just
No
shows
shit.
you how green, and I did call him Greenberg back then for a long time, so it was justified. Ryan's gone over plenty.
Yeah, he worked Terry Funk in a hardcore match on Thunder on January 4th, 2000. So that was, when was Starrcade? I don't even remember it. It was December 19th. Yeah, it's like 2 weeks later. Yeah, read the book. It's this book right here. It's behind me on the shelf. The Bret Hart biography talks all about it. Educate yourselves, people. It's not a defense of Goldberg to say that Bret Hart kept wrestling. He had a head injury. Jesus. But yeah, the Goldberg thing where he's like, well, you knew the kick was coming, is just mind-boggling. I mean, if you're in the wrestling business, I don't know how you have any respect for that.
We were at least 7 to 10 years away to having any idea of what concussions actually do to people.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So, scary stuff. He also apparently has not learned anything. So that's pretty much episodes 2 and 3. Did I leave out anything? I know I wanted to get the Goldberg rant in, so
I shit on Russo, so I'm feeling good.
You did a good job, bro. Good job. Man, it's like almost unlistenable, that guy. I don't know, man. I don't know. Look, I'll give him credit, I guess. He's got an audience. He's been able to monetize his podcast. Those people think that was good television, apparently.
A lot of marks out there, Ryan. A lot of marks.
Who wouldn't want to see Vince Russo in a world championship match?